All right, I'm Mark Bell, and we're here at Super Training Gym with none other than Stan the Rhino Efferding, and we're going to explore some powerlifting, some bodybuilding, and some business. We're going to figure out how Stan the Rhino Efferding became the large rhino that he is today. So, first questions is, in your stay here so far at Super Training, I've already heard 5 or 6 or 7 people ask you about losing body fat. So I figured that would be the first question that we kind of start off with is, let's talk a little bit about, what are some ways that you help somebody lose body fat? Because that's always a big question I hear as well.
Yeah, it's so hard to talk in general terms about dieting or training because everybody's unique, everybody's an individual. They have different goals, they have different starting points, they may have different genetic predispositions, different food allergies. There's so many things that go into that. It's hard to throw something out there and meet everybody's needs. Generally speaking, I'm one to think that I'd like to lose body fat by increasing workload and not by starving yourself with limited calories, because there's no upside to that. Long term, there's nothing else you can do. You can only take out so many calories. So I like to move more and incorporate more activity, and that's just more than you were doing.
Right.
And then I also like to try and retain muscle tissue as much as possible. So I'll keep proteins elevated, and I'll try and use some sort of resistance training to make sure that muscle's stimulated. And beyond that, we're really going to be into specifics for people's personal needs.
Right. It's so obvious to us that weight training is awesome. It has a great value, not only for muscle mass, but for health as well. And you talk quite a bit about, making or allowing your body to work for itself. Can you speak a little bit about that? Because some people get confused when they're trying to lose body fat. They want to do a bunch of cardio. They want to restrict a lot of calories. And then they end up with an issue of how low can they get their calories, how much cardio can they do, and then how long can they sustain such a screwed up way of trying to lose weight?
Yeah, to me it's about messaging. Long term, you want to have more lean body mass to burn more body fat at rest, because that's when the bulk of your body fat is burned, is at rest, not during work. And so I just try and retain lean body mass through resistance training as much as possible, at least multiple times a week, and I minimize the kinds of activities that might cause muscle tissue, might cause you to lose muscle tissue, such as endurance cardio.
Yeah, you mentioned it kind of sending the wrong message to your body.
It sends the wrong message. Yeah, when you do endurance cardio, your body's going to adapt to the stimulus that you provided, and that stimulus says, "Hey, I need to be able to perform this activity for an extended period of time." And muscle tissue's heavy; it has a high nutrient demand, has a high oxygen demand, has a high water demand. So immediately, when you're talking about jogging, etc., for an extended period of time, walking the treadmill or even the step mill, I think that you're setting yourself up for failure long term, because you're going to start slowing your metabolism. You're going to start getting rid of the muscle tissue that's so valuable, the engine that burns the fuel. So again, to me, it's really about weightlifting, and it used to be a hard sell, particularly when you're talking to women, or even men who were concerned about injury, etc.
Now strength training has become more popular, especially amongst women.
Yeah, it should be well known by now that the resistance training, and I think particularly because of the advent of the physiques that were developed by the CrossFitters, who did a lot of Olympic lifts, etc., and heavier training, they could see that the females, they get more muscular and harder, and they're able to eat more food as a result of that increased muscle tissue and that increased workload, which is a desirable thing, because nobody wants to starve themselves all the time. It's unsustainable.
Now, with the exception of somebody who's polishing off a big bowl of ice cream every night, or an entire box of ice cream, or somebody who's eating pizza quite often, aside from somebody who has some poor nutritional habits, let's just say, somebody listening right now has decent nutritional habits. Let's say, on a scale of 1 to 10, they're between a 7 and an 8. Let's just say hypothetically, and they're weight training, and they want to knock off 10 to 15 pounds of body fat. What are a couple things they could do, maybe within their training, within their lifting program, and maybe cardiovascular-wise or HIIT-wise, that they could incorporate?
Yeah. Well, you hit on it right there. First and foremost, it's calories in, calories out.
Right.
And the macros are only marginally as important as that first.
Is there a decent way to shave off a little bit of calories, in your opinion, or is that not a good route to go? You're still looking to expend more energy than...
I look to expend more energy. If you're going to shave off some calories, I'd like to take them out primarily in carbohydrates.
Right.
Because the proteins take so much metabolic effort to digest that you're only, they actually benefit you in terms of the total calories you consume and what your body actually utilizes. But I'm just not big on pulling back on too many calories, but I also don't prescribe a specific diet for individuals. I try and find out, what do you like to eat? When do you like to eat? Where do you like to eat? And then I try and find out, design a program that allows them to do what they would normally do so they can continue to do that. Anytime you go on a diet per se and change things drastically, it's something that you can't sustain, whether it be your work schedule or your travel habits or just foods that you don't enjoy eating.
Right.
And so I start with the calorie count, and after that I can make some adjustments based on macros, protein intake and fat and carbs. But it's way down the list in terms of importance, and it pales in comparison to the workload. Once you've fixed a relatively reasonable, like you said, caloric intake on a relatively healthy diet, say they're getting about 70% right most of the time, then I think the way to go is in terms of workload. And we were just talking to someone today who has been lifting, is consistent and does train. I wanted to figure out, how do you take yourself to the next level, and understanding that each step of the way you have to work a little harder, be a little more disciplined, and as you get closer and closer to your final concept of where you want to be, you have to work that much harder. It becomes exponentially more difficult. To achieve a
like
level
we
of
talked
success.
about with the shape that you're in right now, you're about 255, 260.
Yeah.
And you're probably single-digit body fat. And it would be just that much harder for you to step on a bodybuilding stage. So it'd take you, you said,
it's
9 to 10 months, right?
Half as hard to maintain.
Right.
So it would still be an enormous effort to go from where I'm at to where I could be competitive
To
again.
step on a stage and do well, yeah.
Yeah, even though I feel like, it doesn't take me much to stay where I'm at.
Right.
It would take an extraordinary effort to make a significant change, to improve 10% to be able to compete at that level again. So I think the workload's key, and we're talking about a person who has a reasonable workload. They go to the gym regularly. You've got to start taking yourself somewhere your body hasn't been before if you want it to change.
John Anderson kind of refers to it as deep water.
Deep water, and in this case, one of the most effective things would be the HIIT training that you mentioned. When you can get your heart rate up to 150 plus beats a minute, and it doesn't have to be over an extended period of time, it can be brief. And it can be done any number of ways. It can be done by supersetting synergistic body parts. You could do a dip, rest 30 seconds, do a chin, rest 30 seconds, do a dip, rest 30 seconds. You can just start to increase the volume of your workload and decrease the rest periods. You can do it pushing prowlers. You can do it running stairs. You can do it riding a recumbent bike under tension. But it's explosive, 100% effort that has some sort of resistance component, and then you start to gradually shorten the rest periods over time. That increases the amount of volume you can do in that same given time frame, and the body will adapt to that stimulus.
And these bursts that you're doing, they're lasting somewhere to 8 to 12 seconds, something like that?
Yeah, something like that, 8 to 12 seconds. If you're sprinting upstairs, it might only be a 10-second sprint. You walk back down, you're breathing, you kind of recover. Over time, you're going to try and decrease the rest period, but try and stay as fast or as explosive on the
So let's say like day one, you did 5 sprints. And let's say you're not in really great shape. Maybe
I did it myself.
Yeah.
I'm exactly where you're headed, and I was 290 pounds before.
And so maybe those 5 sets took you 35 minutes to complete, or 30 minutes to complete, because you needed large rest in between. So what you're saying is just do a little bit better each time.
Do a little bit better each time. The first time I ran stairs, and after your last meet, I lost 30 pounds in 30 days.
He was huge, by the way.
40 pounds in 40 days. I got down from 290 to 250 in 40 days. And the method that I used, initially I just walked in the morning because my cardiovascular was so poor that I couldn't even run up a set of stairs. I would just wake up every morning and walk. And then I started adding a little more volume to my training and frequency. Whereas powerlifting, you're training twice a week, real heavy, a lot of rest periods. I started training 4 times a week, a little lighter, more volume, trying to get a sweat on, and just trying to elevate my heart rate. Well, by the time 3 weeks went by and I had a little cardiovascular fitness from walking every morning and gradually increasing the pace at which I walked, I traveled the same distance in less time, just from walking a little faster. I was able to go hit the stairs. And so I found a rack of stairs at a parking garage there at one of the casinos in Vegas. And I would run up the stairs as fast as I could, which wasn't terribly fast at the time. And I had a timer, and I timed it. And then I just walked down, but I had the timer going to measure my rest periods. And it would take me over 3 minutes before I could run another set of stairs. And gradually over time now, I can sprint Like you said, initially 5 sprints with a 3-minute rest. Now I'm doing 12 sprints with a 1-minute rest, and my times are sharp all the way through.
Right.
So gradually you can build that kind of endurance, that kind of cardiovascular fitness, and eventually, of course, you're burning fat throughout this whole process, but stimulating muscle instead of losing muscle.
Yeah, a lot of the people that are listening to this, I would imagine, are powerlifting fans. They're probably currently doing a powerlifting routine. So aside from the HIIT training that you mentioned, that would be a great addition to add in. Could they do? You mentioned 3 sets of 20 on your squats. Would something like that help them burn fat? And or doing supersets like we talked about a little bit earlier today?
Yeah, those would both be great ideas. And
but it's just so simple to add that into your training. Like you can just do it at the end of a training session, correct?
Yeah, and it's about consistency. It can seem pretty intense initially when you employ some sort of exercise program that gasses you out, gets your heart rate up. But if you start doing it consistently, it becomes a little easier, and then you can start increasing the weight or decreasing the rest periods or increasing the volume. But it's of particular importance. I'm not up here talking about this whole concept in terms of general health. I'm talking about it in terms of sports performance now. When you ask me what can powerlifters do to improve their performance, and I'm absolutely one to tell you, because I think that from the bodybuilding training that I did over the years is what made me a great powerlifter.
I can tell you firsthand that it made a huge difference for you, because I've never worked with somebody that was able to pick up something so quickly. And be able to, I showed you a couple things, and I remember specifically we did a safety squat bar workout. I was like, okay, Rhino is a bad mofo. I got to figure out a way to kick his ass. You came in, you did a reverse band deadlift, you did 765 for 2 reps. You did a couple other big lifts, and I was like, you know what? I'm not going to be able to catch this guy on much of anything, so let me have him do something he's never done before. So I said, let's go with a wider stance, let's go with the safety squat bar, and let's do a band. You've never done a band. You've never done the safety squat bar. You've never done a box squat at that point. You've never squatted with a wide stance. First few sets, you weren't doing so good.
I was all over the place.
And I was moving pretty fast. I was like, okay, now I think I might have a chance, And back then I was still in some powerlifting gear and stuff too. So I was like, I'll throw on my powerlifting gear. I'll do whatever I got to do just to even be close to him on this day. But you went through about 3 sets. We got to about 4 plates, which was pretty heavy with the band tension we had on there. And you just looked at me and you shook your head. You're like, Biggs, I figured it out. And then next thing I know, you're going wham, 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 set after set. And it's because of the bodybuilding training. Because at that moment, I started thinking about it. I'm like, this is a guy who came from, training and hitting all of his muscles from many different angles. You're on a leg press, you're on a hack squat, you're doing leg extensions, doing leg curls, you're doing squats, you're doing all these different types of movements. On top of that, you're handling a huge work capacity. So for you, it wasn't any big deal to do set after set after set.
When you take a relatively inexperienced lifter and you put them on a new exercise, it can take them many weeks, what we call neural adaptation, until their body gets used to how to recruit all the muscles necessary in the right firing order to effectively perform the movement. But you take a bodybuilder with 20 years of lifting experience doing a whole range of exercises and you put them on something new, it only takes a few sets. And the neural adaptation seems to happen.
I was blown away because I haven't seen it. I haven't seen that, and I've actually remember making the statement too, and this might not be anything that you are aware of. I told many of our guys before, because I lifted at Westside Barbell. I've lifted with some of the greatest lifters of all time. Chuck Vogelpool and many of the guys at Westside Barbell, Dave Hoff, Dave Tate. I've seen all these guys, Louis Simmons. I've seen all these guys lift up close and personal. I've seen them get coached by Louis, and I've seen all this intense shit going on, And I remember telling some of my guys, I said, no one in here is ever going to do anything that's going to impress me. I've been around a lot. I've seen a lot of lifters. I've seen a lot of great bodybuilders. I've seen a lot of great power lifters. I trained at Gold's Gym for a long time. I've seen Charles Glass train a lot of people. I was like, no one's going to ever come in here and do anything that impresses me. And then you made me eat my words, because some of the shit that you did in our gym was phenomenal. It was earth-shattering, and it was world record breaking at the time, and it was different to see. And I think, you're mentioning the workload, the work capacity that you came from. I think it did make a huge difference. You're talking about training with Flex Wheeler. And Flex Wheeler had you doing like 10 sets of 10 and all this high volume AM, PM training and stuff like that.
Split, double split.
And I think that made a huge difference for you. Week 1, week 2, week 3, it took you a little bit to get your weight back up and get your strength back up.
Yep.
But when you needed it, it was there.
Yeah, and that's the point with respect to trying to train a really top level athlete. Louis Simmons talks about training your weaknesses.
Right.
He does it with lifts. He'll find where you're weak, and then he'll put you on a lift that'll exploit that, and then eventually build that up. And if your weakness is your cardio, that's another huge factor in terms of your recovery.
Right.
Because the better your cardio is, the higher your red blood cell count, the thicker your blood volume.
Right.
All of those things contribute to healing the damage after the fact. And if you're not in somewhat good condition, you're going to have it's going to take you longer to recover from those workouts, and therefore you can't train as often, and that becomes a very important part of your progress.
Well, even the
frequency.
workout you had me do today, you had me and Silent Mike do a back routine. And, we did set 1, set 2, set 3. Once the weight got a little bit heavy, and once you were like, yeah, you're just going to alternate. Like when he's done, you'll rest a little bit, and then you'll go back and forth, and just use basically as little rest as you can handle.
Yeah.
And what I found is like, each set got harder and harder, and it felt like I needed to almost use less and less weight.
Yeah.
So if I build up my work capacity to where that weight is not getting as difficult, or it's almost getting easier, or I can even add weight, then I would imagine I would be that much stronger, right?
Well, eventually you'll get to be just as stronger with that increased volume as you were with the less volume.
Right.
I used to press, say, 14 plates on a side on leg press. It's a bodybuilding movement.
Yeah.
And I would get it for 10 or 12 reps. Well, when I started training with Flex, we'd do sets of 20s with 90-second rest periods, and next thing you know, I was doing 6 plates on the side. Because each subsequent set, I was more and more tired,
Right.
more and more
Right.
oxygen debt. Well, over the course of about 4 or 5 weeks, I had built that back up to 14 plates on the side, but now I was doing 3 sets of 20s instead of 12 with 90-second rest periods.
Yeah.
I'd only gotten stronger, but I'd gotten more endurance and my turnover rate, my VO2 max, everything had improved, my oxygen levels had improved, and I was recovering from those workouts fast enough to do them twice a week.
Yeah.
In addition to every other body part, we were working out twice a day, 6 days straight. My point with that is that as a power lifter, you'll spend years building your bench from 225 to 450, but will you spend 6 or 8 weeks building your cardiovascular? Because maintaining it is much easier than creating it.
How many months did you go without squatting before you came back to me and did a 900-pound squat in my gym?
At least 6 months I hadn't squatted a single weight. And then I came to you, and within, 5 weeks, we had me doubling 800, I did an 850.
Yep.
Yeah, so.
Powerlifters that are listening right now, I know you're terrified by hearing that you would stop squatting for that period of time.
Yeah.
But it also doesn't mean that they have to completely stop. I mean, you can still execute the movement.
Yeah.
You can move on to doing higher rep ranges. As you're saying, nowadays you go with a much closer stance. You do 3 sets of 20. Yeah. There's no reason why you can't still practice the movements and do them, but move on to some other things and work on building up your conditioning is what you're saying, right?
Yeah. And at my age, I've got to be a little more careful about, potentials for injury, about long-term health. So I don't want to carry as much body weight, and I don't want to do exercises that can potentially injure me. And so I pick those movements, like you say, high bar, close stance, because they're more muscle dominant and less, say, hip or lower back dominant.
Not compromising the joint of your hip so much.
Yep. I don't mind putting the load on the muscles now, but the joints, they don't recover as quickly.
You're 47?
47 now.
You're 47 now. Do you feel like you can do the same amount of stuff or even more stuff than when you were 27?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I don't have the top end strength. Like my single on my bench might be 500 now.
That's pretty motivational, though. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
You're able to do that.
But I can sprint stairs, and I'm in excellent condition all year round. There's other things I can do. Now, there is a point at which, when you start a program like this, it took you a long time to gain all that body fat. And as you remember, when you were losing fat, you do lose some strength.
Oh, yeah.
And in order to starve the fat off your body, you make some compromises. But that's a very brief period under which your body's resetting itself.
Right.
And then it came back, and you were actually stronger on the raw bench at 250 than you were at 310.
Yeah.
And so it does come back. You really got to stick with the program.
Right.
You can't bounce around, and you have to invest in a long-term plan that has some off-season a program which you're going to burn some fat, increase your cardiovascular fitness, and then when you get yourself set for your next pre-contest prep, you're positioned to be more successful.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's It definitely makes sense, but it's hard to, as a powerlifter, it's hard to embrace. And I think
want to come lift heavy weights.
Yeah, and I think even as a bodybuilder, though, it's probably hard sometimes for a bodybuilder to always embrace what powerlifters are doing.
Yeah.
You know?
You know, and at the same time that I was talking about training less, everybody else was talking about the Bulgarian system and training
Right.
more. And so I've always run a little contrary, you know, to the general public opinion on these things. The norm, or I guess what you know people consider the latest fad or craze.
Right.
I've been around for almost 30 years, and so I've seen all the fads and crazes. So,
yeah, when you were with me originally, we did usually about once a week. We would go hard once a week on a squat, bench, or deadlift, and we had variations of those lifts. We wouldn't always do the same exact lift. It might be a reverse band, it might be a slight deficit, or it might be a rack pull or something like that. We switched it up quite a bit, and then you know, as your goals became bigger and as you got stronger, you realized you needed even more recovery.
And that's a big issue. As you get stronger, you need more recovery. When you're younger and you haven't developed your potential in the beginner or intermediate stages, you can recover a little quicker because you're not putting yourself under as much load. But when you're squatting over 800 pounds every week, you might start not recovering as fast or actually declining in performance. And so I found that I had to actually pull back on some of that frequency. And maybe alternate from a heavy deadlift one week to a heavy squat the next week to another week for the heavy deadlift. Right. So I actually was backing off while everybody else was trying to do more because I wanted to make sure I got to the meet healthy.
Right.
And I think over time I've seen more and more athletes start to understand at an elite powerlifting level that your training frequency can't be that of a weightlifter because the loads, the eccentric
the Bulgarian
loads
system is from a weightlifting program.
And a lot of those guys have been filtered out over the years to be just the elite recovery guys who can recover at that pace. It's not the program that got all of them successful. Some 85% or 90% of them quit.
Right.
And I don't want people to be part of that 85, 90%.
Or got hurt.
Or got hurt.
Yeah.
That was the big thing. Injuries.
Yeah, people tend to argue over which program works, and you know, people go back and forth on it, you know, all the time. But you really have to find something that works for yourself. You hear it time and time again, and sometimes people get kind of frustrated hearing that advice because it takes you a long time. But you know, it took you years and years to kind of figure out what was going to work for you, and you kind of stumbled upon which is now kind of called the Lillibridge method, which is basically going heavy every other week.
Yeah, we were training together back then when we were kind of bouncing around these similar concepts and had similar success with the program.
Right.
You know, I think that you tend to try and follow, you know, or people try and look towards other successful lifters to see what's working for them.
Right.
Milanichev said the same thing. His former coach used to put him through an enormous amount of volume.
Right.
And now his volume is drastically decreased, or has been for about the last 4 years.
I know Cohen has said, like on the big lifts, bench, squat, deadlift, that he pretty much stopped doing anything over I think 3 reps, because he just found that you know, when he was younger, he would do sets of 6 and sets of 8, and he built a huge foundation off of that. Yeah. But as he got stronger, once he started squatting over 1,000, what's he gonna do? 900 for 6? I mean, what kind of abuse is that going to have on his knees and his hips and everything else?
And by the same token, Benedict says the same thing. He came out and deadlifted with me in Vegas, and he says, you know, he can't pull that heavy.
Benedict Magnuson, 1,019 deadlift.
He knows a little something about deadlifting and heavy training, and he said the same thing. He says he only pulls, you know, he pulls less frequently, and he pulls at a lower percentage of his max in training because he knows he's got the top end and he can tap into it when he needs to.
Now, what if you had somebody younger? What if you had somebody who's 16? 15, you know, teenager that wanted to get stronger? Let's say, you know, maybe they're training for football or something like that. Would you kind of have them follow something similar to where they're only training heavy like once a week, or would you have them stick with more basic movements, sets of 10? You know, where would you start someone like this?
Boy, that's a loaded question too. Now everybody's an individual. You got different body types. You got people at different stages of their
Someone might be fundamentally sound with some of the movements right off the bat.
It's hard. I mean, typically you start with a 5x5 program with those guys. You know, you don't want to be doing 1s and 2s. It doesn't lead to enough hypertrophy, and you don't want to be doing too much hypertrophy training because you want to make sure they get some strength results out of it. And then you want to make these sport-specific movements, so you're not low bar, wide stance squatting, because that's all ass.
That's something I talk to people about quite a bit, is that powerlifting movement as it's done per competition is almost a little bit of a trick.
Yeah.
You know, and you use that movement specifically for lifting as much as you possibly can.
Yeah.
A low bar, wide stance squat being a great example of it. Or the way that I tend to bench press. I drop my bench presses and I tend to kind of throw them back up. I don't drop them as violently as some other people do, but I do tend to drop the weight down quickly and throw it back up. 90% of my training is never that way, though. I try to do it more strict.
Right.
Would you kind of agree with that? Like that the powerlifting movement is a little bit more of a,
Yeah,
save that for when you're going to compete type thing?
Well, muscles respond best, in that mid-range, but through a full range of motion.
Right.
In that repetition range, say 5 to 12 reps, but through a full range of motion. And as a powerlifter, we don't necessarily want to be at that stretch position.
Right.
We want to keep ourselves loaded most of the time, and that's why we do the low bar and the ass out. But in sports performance, whether it's a sprinter or a football player or any of the like, you want to develop the kind of skills that's necessary to improve sprinting or vertical or long jump and broad jump and everything else. There's angles that you need to respect. You need
Right.
to respect the angle of the shin and the angle of the back at 45 degrees when you're squatting. You can't have a straight shin and a bent over back and expect to be explosive out of that position in a sprint or in a high jump
Right.
position.
Yeah,
So-
you had some of the most vertical shin position I've ever seen on big squat before.
Yeah, and that wouldn't translate very well to a sprinter.
Right.
So you want to get yourself in a position where you're doing maybe more of a front squat or a high bar squat, so that your angles are correct for explosive kind of power
Right.
movements. And then there's a limit as to how much of that really translates. At some point, getting stronger doesn't necessarily translate. It can only start to possibly be a detriment because of potential injury, et cetera, or that in time that you're investing into that extra little bit of strength, you're not getting a return, or you're compromising
Right.
sport-specific training or endurance training and stuff like
Right.
that. So I like the fundamentals, the basics. I think they should be part of every program, and I'm frustrated when they're not in for high school
Yeah,
athletes.
and you would suggest that whether it's bodybuilding, powerlifting, training for a sport, you want to see some of the basics implemented into the training.
Always, because
Bench,
you're-
squat, deadlift, bent over row, shoulder presses,
Yeah,
stuff like that,
chins,
right?
things, whole body movements that require you to involve your core, balance, coordination, multiple muscle groups through multiple joints
Mm-hmm.
working together. That's sports.
Right. Yeah, you've always been a proponent of, anytime I've asked you for advice, I think I'm always kind of looking for something a little more fancy.
Yeah.
And now I know better. Now I know what's coming back at me.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
now I know it's going to be the real deal, and it's going to be something that's effective, something that works. But it's going to be, if I'm asking you about deadlift, hey, my back tends to round over on a deadlift. Well, why don't you try these T-bar rows? Stay tight, pull them in low to your stomach, get your elbows back.
Yeah.
Activate your lats a little bit more.
Stabilize the lower back. I think hopefully we're coming full circle, like we have in nutrition over the last 40 years with all of the misdirection in terms of cholesterol and sodium, et cetera,
Right.
things that are valuable for athletes. Some of these movements, everybody wanted to get into the latest craze with their bands and their Bosu balls and,
Right.
and all this other stuff, and instability training, et cetera. And just the variety and the pitter-patter of movements through ladders, trying to think you can develop speed that
Right.
way. And this nonstop box jumping with the absence of the core
Right.
squat to develop the strength to improve that
Right.
performance.
I mean, even something like stable training, doing a heavy squat has been proven to be much more effective than unstable surface training, such as being on a stability ball.
Absolutely. And you can't improve your squat by box jumping.
Right.
But you can certainly improve your box jump by squatting.
Right.
These are all accessory work, and so
Right.
I think the cores still need to be in there. You need to build a strong body, and it's also how you're going to build strong tendons and ligaments for your knees, and for these dynamic sports where you have lots of different angles and things. Those are going to be built through power movements like the squat, or even a heavy loaded prowler movement, and core stabilization type exercises, your dips and your chins and stuff like that, deadlifts. But you're not building a powerlifter, I understand that, but you're building a stronger, more durable athlete that can perform better on all these other movements.
Right.
And so we're slowly, I think, coming back to introducing those fundamentals, those core lifting. When you watch the big football programs, the most successful in the country, they have those basics in line. They use them consistently,
Right.
and as part of a program. Even somebody like Kobe Bryant throughout his career has weight trained,
Yeah.
and pretty aggressively in the off season, and then during the season he's able to maintain that with just a short session once a
Right.
week.
Right.
And that's for athletes. It takes so many months or years to build the fundamentals of a strong physique under a squat rack under load.
Yeah.
you can build your cardiovascular system in a matter of weeks.
Not many people realize this, but you are not only working with high-level bodybuilders and powerlifters, but you're also working with high-level athletes, right?
Yeah, we've worked with a lot of athletes since back in college at the University of Oregon, early as, say, 1993, 94. Worked with, Keith Williams was an NFL football player. He was an Olympic
Played for the
sprinter.
Vikings, a running back, right?
He was a running back, yep, and he also beat Carl Lewis in the 60-meter indoor, and that was as a result of increasing his body weight and increasing his muscular strength so that he could be a fast sprinter. I've worked with NFL football players from over a dozen different teams, and I've worked with NBA players, MLS, soccer players, guys that are fighting MMA fighting, and a lot of times these guys are I think underweight, under strength,
right,
for the demands of their sport.
You do something fancy with these guys? You stick them in a hyperbaric chamber, have them on some sort of special machine or something crazy like that?
No, I step back and I look at their whole program and I try and figure out, what's this person's weak link? Like in the case of the NBA player I trained last year, he was sidelined because of injury. His back was starting to hurt him. A few questions later, I find out that his college weight was 10 pounds heavier than his NBA weight. And the guy was just under-muscled. He had been run too hard, and he had lost
maybe in
stability.
college he had more time to focus on training or something like that.
Yeah, maybe he was eating more, maybe he was training more, maybe he was playing less.
Yeah.
But he got the NBA, and they tend to run you pretty hard, and you end up compromising lean body mass as a result. That's what worried me about LeBron James when he went on his diet over the summer. It's that he lost a lot of lean body mass, which makes you more susceptible to injury under those kinds of workloads and dynamic forces. So even with injuries, I try and maintain and gain lean body mass, and the best way to do that is under load.
Right.
And as long as you can find a form, a functional form for them that doesn't compromise their injuries, you should be loading the athletes, whether it be for tall guys, it might be something as simple as a farmer's carry.
Right.
So they don't have to go through all of the knee bending of a squat, but they can still get the load benefit necessary to build full body strength under load.
And they're getting a lot of stability.
A lot of stability from that, a lot of strength from that, and they just get stronger in the knees and hips and all over in the whole body. So just about everyone that I've brought through, I've tried to put more muscle mass on them. I'll tell you a quick story. In 1995, I was training, 1994, I was training a bunch of the guys from the University of Oregon Ducks. And one of them in particular was a high-level track athlete as well. And he was about 175 pounds. But he was worried that he wasn't going to start next year at the U of O for running back because the guy in front of him was bigger and stronger.
Right.
And so he came to me, and over about a 6-month period, we put about 17 pounds of muscle on him by decreasing all of his distance work, increasing the resistance work, and increasing his calories. And so we had to cut back on his total volume of work, drastically increase his food intake, and then put him under load. But it was still sport-specific stuff, running in sand, pushing prowlers, squats were implemented as well, clean and presses, full body movements. His track coach was livid because I told him, don't run over 100 meters. Not one time did he run over 100 meters in practice, and generally it should be 40s. Don't do any of the distance work. In 45 minutes, you should be done with practice. And they used to run 2-hour practices. Now, this is at the U of O. This is Tracktown, USA. And this is 20-some years ago.
Yeah.
I'm telling an athlete to tell his coach, this is Phil Knight's track team.
Yeah,
and
Nike.
Nike, and they've got, the Olympic trials there every year. And I tell him to tell his coach, you're not going to do this, you're not going to do that. And this wasn't Bo Jackson, So coaches did what Bo said he was going to do, and that was fine. But this was just one guy.
Yeah.
And the coach was livid. Called him out in front of the whole team, said, you're not a team player, you're just focused on football, blah, blah, blah. Well, he ended up taking second in the Pac-10 championships that year at 192 pounds. I ran his fastest 100-meter dash ever. I think it was a 10.17 or something like that, which his time was extraordinary. 10.17 was, it was world class. And then went on to score, set a record for the most touchdowns ever at the University of Oregon in football that year, and they went to the Rose Bowl that year. So, when you can convince somebody, when they buy into the program and understand long-term what the benefit is of increasing lean body mass and how it translates into performance and how it fixes injuries. There's only so much distance you can get with chiropractic work and massage and foam rolling and ART, et cetera, et cetera. It's temporary, and it doesn't do anything to strengthen the muscles. And so when we get them under load in movements through all 3 planes of motion, then they start to build stability in muscle and performance improves, you know, it's a great thing for athletes.
With a lot of these athletes, did you just have them doing, you know, a lot of the same, you know, movements that you're always talking about, you're always preaching, the similar diet principles and everything?
There's so many things you can take out of programs. You know, work for the sake of work is just exercise. It's not training.
Right.
You know, and that wasn't my goal to bring people in.
It's a great quote.
Just because somebody sweats and their heart rate elevates doesn't mean that they're becoming a better athlete or they're gaining muscle or their performance is improving.
Right.
You know, that's for amateurs. But for these guys at an elite level, you need to do something different. It needs to be based in, I think, the core concepts with some sort of progressive resistance. They have to be getting stronger in order to perform better.
How did you, you know, I know you've been around for a long time, but a lot of guys have been around for a long time and they're stupid. Yeah. You know, let's be honest. How have you acquired this amount of knowledge? I mean, you're talking about, you know, slapping all this weight on these guys. You're talking about them, you know, taking a lot more precaution with the recovery. You know, is a lot of it trial and error of your own? Like, did you start out small and then you got bigger? Or?
Yeah, I got to college as 140 pounds. We didn't have the internet, and so you didn't
140?
have much. 140 pounds.
140 pounds, not kilos.
Yeah, no, not
140
kilos.
pounds.
I wrestled 98 and 106 in high school, so I was a small guy. And I got to college, I wanted to get bigger, and so I started lifting weights. And even after a couple years of training all out, I had only gained maybe 16, 18 pounds. And I realized I was doing something wrong at some point.
How many years did you say?
After 2 years.
2 years of training, you gained 16 to 18
pounds. I was only
pounds.
158 pounds at my first bodybuilding show after about 2.5 years of training.
Jesus.
158 pounds as a lightweight, you know, in the novice
That's
class.
embarrassing.
Yeah, it was embarrassing, especially when you go to the gym 6 days a week, 2 hours a day. Problem is that's too much, and I wasn't eating enough. You know, the bodybuilding diet was chicken and tuna and
right.
you know, stuff like that.
You were training too much. You weren't eating enough. Probably not eating enough fat.
Wasn't doing
because at the time fat was like fat was frowned upon. You weren't allowed to eat fat back then, right?
You're a bodybuilder. You were six pack all year round, but you did it at the sacrifice of.
Were you lean?
Gains. I was really lean.
Yeah. Okay.
But there's a point at which lean is a detriment.
Yeah.
You know, you have to maintain.
Lean under 200 pounds is just not acceptable anyway.
Sure.
Let's face the facts.
You have to maintain a certain level of body fat to perform optimally.
Right.
You know, when that gets under about, I don't know, you get under 10%. And things start to get more difficult for you. The joint strain.
Let's talk about that for a second, because I noticed, you know, you got like Bones Jones, Anderson Silva. I mean, both those guys have a similar body type. You got Chuck Liddell. You got a lot of these UFC guys at a really high level. Even some of the CrossFitters. I know like Rich Froning has a good physique and stuff like that. Do you feel that some people can get too lean? You know, for their particular sport. I mean, it's cool to look good and everything, but you can probably get almost too lean for some of these different activities, right?
Absolutely. You know,
need a little bit of tissue on you, don't you?
Need a little tissue on you. Performance is compromised at some point, and I don't know exactly where that is, but certainly anything below. I mean, when you get down below 10, 9, 8%, certainly you're going to start compromising performance.
Right.
You know, you're going to have your strength to weight ratio is going to suffer. Your joints are going to suffer. Your ability to endure, say, dynamic types of you know, sports such as football and stuff, the impact, your ability to recover from that all kinds of tries to suffer a little bit. But some of those guys, they don't train at that body fat percentage, and they don't reach that weight until just a 24-hour weight cut. You know, but Rich is in great condition, but he's not 6%.
No, he's not way down there.
10, 12,
right
in there, which is, you know, is phenomenal. But bodybuilding is a weird world. Those guys are on stage, and they couldn't fight your way out of a wet paper bag when you're on stage at a bodybuilding show.
Right.
I mean, you're one step away from being hauled off in a gurney.
Right.
So it's a totally different world. I don't train athletes that way. I don't look at that as a peak performance.
And there's going to be some people that just naturally they're going to be able to operate okay at a lower body fat.
Yeah.
And that's what everybody tends to look at. Like, oh, look at this guy, he's doing this. And then people also confuse what you did. You know, people always tell me, you know, like, oh, Stan, he did bodybuilding and powerlifting at the same time. Like, no, he actually didn't. He power lifted, and then he went to bodybuilding. Yeah. And then he power lifted, then he went to bodybuilding.
Yeah.
And when he power lifted, he hung out with powerlifters. When he did bodybuilding, he hung out with bodybuilders.
Yeah. And when I power lifted, I tried to get my weight up to 280 plus. And when I bodybuild, I was down to 250. So it was a different body composition. But I never got too fat because I was always turning around and dieting again, and I never got, you know, too emaciated because I turned around and had to lift heavy weights again. So, you know, they kind of complemented each other.
But you didn't really lift heavy weights when you were completely shredded.
No, and I remember many a times. One time I lifted in the Arnold, in the cage, the animal cage at the Arnold, and it was a week after I'd competed in the Flex Pro, and they wanted me to do the 200-pound incline dumbbell presses.
Right.
And I struggled with them. Everybody, oh gosh, boy, you lost a lot of strength. Well, you know, when I'm 285, I'm doing the 200-pound incline presses like nothing. But when you're 250 and you just competed in a show and you're water depleted and everything, it's a whole different world. You cannot maintain that.
What do you think about, what do you think about powerlifters dropping weight for contests? Not at the elite level. The elite level, you know, let the guys do what they want to do. You know what I mean? But you know, at the novice level, at the intermediate level, some of these people that are, you know, someone weighs, you know, 170. Or 175, and they want to compete at 165 in a competition. Do you think it's at all a good idea to drop weight for that competition?
Yeah, I can't speak to an individual's goals long term.
Right.
If your goal long term is to be as big and as strong, you know, as you can be within a reasonable body fat percentage, and et cetera, then I think that you can inhibit your progress by continually cutting all the time.
Right.
The same thing was true for me in high school. Probably one of the reasons I was so small is because I was always dieting for wrestling.
Right.
I was always overtraining and undereating. And so there's a point at which I think that if you feel your body over a long period, some people tend to want to compete pretty often.
Right.
Now you're cutting, bulking.
Right.
You know, at what point do you build a sustainable, you know, strength and body mass long term? Eddie Cohn started at 165, ended up at 242.
Yeah.
You know, his progression over the years was to continue to get as big and strong as possible, not to hold him back.
Yeah.
He could have stayed at 185 or 198 his whole career if he wanted to. But he kept pushing himself to see what he was capable of.
I got a lot of people, you know, that they'll say, you know, my goal for this contest, I want to, you know, squat 500, I want to bench 300 and pull 500. And then they'll tell me, oh, you know, but I think I'm going to drop body weight so I can be more competitive.
Yeah.
You know, why don't you stick to goal number one? Like, how about you worry about the weights that you do on the platform and not worry about your body weight so much?
Yeah.
Like, wouldn't it be a good idea, don't you think, maybe to kind of, you know, clear out some goals before you drop down in weight, you know, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I always just wanted to get as strong as possible. I looked at the numbers. I didn't look at what the weight classes were at 2,300 plus.
Like Eric Lillibridge just squatted, 914 without knee reps. Who cares what he weighed?
Right. It doesn't matter.
Who gives a shit what he weighed? He could weigh 350 pounds, you know, it doesn't make a difference.
No, I never looked at the Wilks formula. I never looked at the multiple of body weight. I kind of wanted to lift as much as I could lift. Everybody has their own goals.
Right. Everybody's a little different, yeah.
And they're a little different. And some people do it, you know, just to compete for fun. But as you work your way into an elite level and really want to, you know, make an impact or set some records, then you have to consider you need some more hypertrophy in order to translate that into more strength.
Right.
So at some point you're going to have to try and add more muscle mass, and that's going to be more weight.
You mentioned you know, growing up very thin. Let's go back to that a little bit. And I think you told me at a certain point that you got a scholarship for soccer.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. I was playing soccer. I was going to go to college and play soccer, and the coach said I was too skinny for soccer. He wanted me to go to the weight room. So I went in and I worked out, and I loved it so much.
Where did you grow up?
Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was going to go to
did you play sports all your life? Played a bunch of different sports?
Yeah, a bunch of different sports. Played soccer and I wrestled and played baseball, and I was too small for football and basketball until the guys got too tall. And so I think that's kind of the way to go when you're younger, is do a whole variety of sports. If we talk about kids that are preteen, et cetera, and specializing should come much later, you know, when you get
older, yeah.
When you're older. But you know, those were the opportunities that were available to me at the time, and I just found something that I loved to do. So I told Coach, I'm not coming back. I'm gonna lift. And at the time, it wasn't about. There was no team.
Right.
You know, there was. I just wanted to be jacked. I was tired of being scrawny.
Right.
And so I thought that was the answer. And you know, I say that every time I go do a seminar, say for a high school football team or something. You know, all the kids are in there and they're in the weight room, and I tell them, I said, okay, you know, show of hands, how many people in here know that you know, you build muscle lifting weights? And they all raise their hand. Yeah, I build muscle lifting weights. And I said, well, that's wrong. All you do is break down muscle tissue.
Right.
And that's how we start the conversation, is that you got to eat.
Right.
You know, that was the big thing. You got to be able to eat and eat plenty of food consistently, and that the weight training just breaks down tissue. It's just the stimulus.
Right.
Because that's what the coaches are worried about. They only get the athletes for 1 or 2 hours a day. And then the other 23 hours a day, they have to rely on the athlete to do the things they're supposed to do, sleep and eat.
Right.
And that doesn't seem to get drilled into their heads enough that that's on them.
When you transitioned from soccer, into lifting weights more, did it take you a long time to start to gain size and stuff like that?
Yeah, because doing everything wrong. Like you mentioned, I was lifting too much and I was eating too little.
Right.
And when I finally flipped the script on that and started consuming
Did someone
more
teach
food,
you that, or did you?
Yeah, I had bumped into a good longtime friend of mine, Mark Delp, who owned Delp's Gym in Eugene, Oregon. And he
What was that gym like?
That was
Old school?
Yeah, old school.
Yeah.
All the dumbbells were on the floor.
They have a certain smell to it and stuff like that.
Yeah, a certain smell. You didn't go in the bathroom in that place. It was
Right.
full of ex-convicts, or future convicts.
Yeah.
It was quite an interesting place. But everybody in there was lifting serious. It was what they wanted to do.
Right.
Throwing around some big weight.
Everybody wanted to be strong.
Yeah, everybody wanted to be strong. And that's good. But he told me that I had to lift a little less and I had to eat a little more. And once I started.
Did he bodybuild?
He did. He
Okay.
competed in bodybuilding as well, as a lot of people from his gym did. So it was.
I think it's really great to hear about these different people having mentors.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times people might look at yourself or look at me or look at someone like Ed Cohn and just think you did it all on your own. But it's good to hear that people are kind of they run into people that help inspire them or teach them or coach them.
Yeah, and I've learned a lot over the year, just strictly from either observation or from my own experience or from other people helping me, and tried to share that with the athletes that I've trained over the years. And you find that
we all need
more
help,
and more people. Yeah, and even after studying as long as I did and knowing as much as I knew and competing at the level that I competed at for 20 years, when I wanted to be really great, I packed my bags and went down and trained with Flex Wheeler.
Right.
And I learned a lot from him. And then when I wanted to set world records in powerlifting, I came over and I packed my bags and I lived in an extended stay and I trained with you every day.
Right.
So there's a point at which, whether you think you know it all or not, even the collaboration can be hugely beneficial, just to be able to throw things on the table and come up with a consistent game plan and have somebody hold you accountable to that, or maybe push you like you did with the team. Every time we came in, it was a competition in the gym every day.
Right.
And that's what really helps you excel. And everybody says it. If you're the strongest guy in your group, get a new group.
Right.
It's just you need to be around the kind of people that take you to another level.
Well, it helps when you come in and you say, I want to squat 800 pounds. And then I say, okay, I've seen people do that before. I'm not like, hey, you know what, man? Like, that's a lofty goal. I don't think it's going to happen, buddy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I've seen it.
Fortunately for me, I didn't know. I wasn't really following the sport.
Yeah. You didn't know it was heavy or whatever.
When I squatted that 854 with no knee wraps, I had no idea that was a world record. I didn't know it hadn't been done before, particularly not by a guy that was 40-some years old.
Right.
So to me, it seemed reasonable because, if I saw somebody...
Because you were within range and you were strong, yeah.
Yeah. Or if we're in the gym and Haas Cartwright pops in and bangs out a couple reps with 800, that becomes believable to me.
Yeah.
I'm like, who's this fat guy squatting 800?
Right.
And so I go over and I think I can do it. And sure enough, after seeing it happen and believing that you can do it and training at that level, made it happen.
What's the deal with noises?
I don't know where that came from.
Hey!
I have no idea. And I can remember back.
You remember that one day in particular, like you hit like a PR. You maybe did like a double, and you made it even. You made like a new noise. We were like, what the fuck? And you're like, I don't know
where they come from. And I don't even hear it most of the time. I don't realize what's going on. I don't hear the music when I'm lifting, all the stuff's going on in the background.
And it kind of goes against conventional, like, information. Conventional.
Yeah, you want to hold your breath.
Yeah, you want to hold your breath. You want to try to push out against your belt and all these different things. And you're screaming like a maniac out of the bottom of the lift.
Even in the descent.
Yeah, and even
letting air out, but it's more like a pulling a balloon on the way down.
Right. Why'd you move so slow in the squat on the way down?
I've always been really, really tight, and I use it as a stretch reflex kind of motion.
Could you move fast, or
I don't think
doesn't feel right? Okay.
I don't think I could, because when I got to the hole, I wouldn't be able to stop.
Okay.
That's the problem. I feel like I would just fold up like an accordion.
You kind of lifted like you were...
tension on the spring.
You kind of, yeah.
I feel like I can pop out of that hole.
Okay. You kind of lifted like you had powerlifting gear on.
Yeah.
You see like a guy in a canvas suit, and he'd go down, and it would take him 5-6 seconds to get down, then whoosh, they'd pop up.
I don't know, initially probably just fear. I probably thought if I went down too fast, I'd never come back up and end up sitting on the floor. But I don't know where that came from. I can remember people complaining about me making noise 20-some years ago at a gym in my hometown.
And you're like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, just doing dips. I'd be over there making noise doing dips. I don't know where it came from, and I wasn't trying to annoy anybody. It just, it just happens.
One thing that I think is important for people to understand is it was really, really rare in all the times that we trained together for me to see you miss a lift. You might have, just like anybody else, you might have had an error here or there, like you might have stumbled with a squat or something like that on rack or whatever might have happened, but it was really rare to see you miss any lifts. I don't recall any missed squats at all.
Certainly not any singles.
Yeah, I can't think of any missed squats at all.
Sometimes I would try a double or a triple on a bench and might not get the second or third rep.
Right, I only remember one missed bench attempt. You missed like a 595 in training. It was like leading into maybe like your first meet.
Yeah.
But you were still able to go to the meet and still bench 600
yeah.
or 606, whatever the number was for that particular meet. But that was the same day we had a conversation, and this is really rare to have happen. It's really rare for somebody to take information that they hear and apply it to the heavier weights. It's not uncommon for me to teach somebody something and they can apply it to 225.
Yeah.
But I was telling you, I was like, man, I've talked to you about it before.
You were telling me about decelerating using the lats.
Yeah, and I'm like, your elbows are out here.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm telling you every week, and you wouldn't listen to me. I'm like, your fucking elbows are out here.
Stan,
your elbows are.
Finally got a hold of me. It was maybe a week or 2 weeks at the most.
Yeah, before the competition.
Before the competition, and I went home and when you first try and bounce your pec, you put your finger on it and you bounce it, right? And eventually you can do it without the finger.
That's what I do.
Right? And it's the same thing when I'm trying to teach people how to flare their lats, a bodybuilder, how to pose their lats, and I have them hold on to something and how to pose their lats and flare them. Well, when you were talking to me, I went home that night in the mirror, and I was doing this, resisting, putting my triceps into my lats.
Yeah,
and I was
lay your tricep down in your lat, yeah.
Resisting, and I think I only had one bench practice before the meet. And then I specifically remember that 606 bench at the meet. I did not feel the weight on the way down.
Yeah.
Which is the way it should be.
And you smashed it.
When you lock in.
Remember Big Roy cheering for you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's going crazy.
Spitting all over my face. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
When you lock in on a bench and you're able to resist with the lats, your pecs don't get pre-exhausted on the way down. You don't really.
They don't get loaded.
They don't get loaded. I didn't feel it, and I got all the way down here, and then all
You'll
of a sudden,
feel them when you press. But
plus
that's
the initiation, the braking inertia, happens with the lats. And so I was able to already build up some momentum. By the time my chest took effect, I already.
That was just so funny because week in and week out, I was telling you, you need to bring your elbows in. Yeah. You need to bring your elbows in. You need to bring your elbows in. But you were so strong, it didn't make any difference.
Well, the funny thing
and then you finally missed a lift, and I was like, motherfucker, you need to tuck your elbows in.
It's interesting how that technique evolved because I never historically had powerlifted with any focus on the actual form or technique. Even back in the mid-'90s when
Which is funny to hear you say that.
I had done 2 meets in the mid-'90s, one full meet and one bench dead. And that was all I had powerlifted before that meet that I did the year before I trained with you. So the time I think that I did that total with you is probably only my 4th meet in my life.
You haven't done a lot, period.
So, but lifting all the time was just about lifting heavy weights. And the things that you taught me, I was doing a conventional stance squat.
Right.
And like you said, when the time we did that safety bar, you had me do the wide stance, and it was so effective that this was probably maybe 4 or 5 weeks before the meet. I switched from a narrow stance or shoulder width stance to a wide stance, which is why I was always having trouble with my balance because I hadn't practiced it enough.
And that's why we brought your head down,
crappy Asics shoes that had rolled over on the outside. But that took my squat from a 755 to an easy 821. I mean, I just exploded with the 821 at that meet.
Right.
And the 854 would have been easy too, but for my rocking forward on my balance. So, I mean, look at the huge differences that can be made with technique at some point.
Right, and just sometimes even just a little bit of difference with bar placement, or like you said, foot placement in that particular case. Well, I think we've hit a lot of good points here, and I think that's pretty much it. So awesome having you here. Strength is never a weakness, and that's it from supertraining.tv.
Good.
Could have talked to you forever.
But we got to go eat.
Yeah, we do.